Hey guys, I'm with a friend of mine, someone I really respect. Met Chris week 3 of the war, and we were in Lviv, and you were at that time you were processing all the volunteers that were coming in to help defend Ukraine from falling. And those were, in certain times, and we're going to talk about that in another interview I'm going to do with Chris that he's been kind enough to make himself available for tonight. But what I wanted to focus on is, we all know this. We all know that those of us who've been in the military, we know that all military lessons are written in blood. And so Chris and I have an obligation to take these lessons we're learning in Ukraine and share that with our brothers and sisters in uniform back home. Chris is at a very high level, one of the foremost experts of the EOD's scene here in Ukraine. And he's been kind enough to sit down. I just want to go over some of these things. I have been here in Ukraine since the war. We're approaching 3 years now, for about 9 months. And I've called Chris probably 3 or 4 times. I'm taking a video of some ordnance of something that is in my AO. It's sometimes in the basements of these where we're flying our drone missions. I'm saying, hey man, I've never seen this before. I mean, I know not to touch it, but what is it? And Chris gives us some insights, and with his knowledge base is phenomenal. So I wanted to get this on camera to introduce Chris, to let him share what he can share. I can't give all the trade secrets just because it's these things are always evolving, and just have him talk and tell his story on the EOD scene. And then our next interview is going to be on how he basically stood up a volunteer army, played his part, and got things organized in Lviv. We'll do that after this one. So Chris, please introduce yourself. I got to tell this story real quick. When I first met Chris, they introduced him as Swampy. That's his nickname, right? And I swear to God, I kept hearing him say Stumpy. And so I said, hey Stumpy, it's nice to meet you. And then he said, no, it's not. I'm not Stumpy yet. So it was
still not yet.
Yeah, still not yet. So it was pretty funny. Chris, please take it from here, brother.
Hi. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. You've bigged me up quite a bit there, so I'm going to have to try and perform now. But yeah, my name is Christopher Garrett. I'm a British bomb disposal technician from the Isle of Man. I've been volunteering on and off in Ukraine since 2014, since August 2014. And since 2023, my partner and I set up an organization called Prevail, which is a US 501c3 charity. And we are just completely focused on either doing medical evacuations, medical support, or landmine awareness training, clearance training, explosives risk training to the military, police, emergency services, and a number of Ukrainian agencies.
I've been here for a couple of your trainings, and I know you've been doing some trainings at a very high level for the Ukrainian government, and you can speak to that, but it was pretty impressive, some of the people who've come through your school to learn what the best tactics are.
Yeah, I mean, we will, as long as someone is coming to us from a government entity, whether it be the military, fire service, the police, government agencies, as we say, we just want to be able to train to the best level that we can, which is appropriate to the actual ground situation that is here. There is a number of different organizations that we've seen in the past, whether it be for bomb disposal or medical or weapons training. The problem that sometimes happens is you see a lot of training that's going out and it's not actually applicable in Ukraine at all. The situation in Ukraine is evolving almost on a weekly basis now, and we have to be able to catch up and keep up with that to be able to provide the training that's needed.
Chris, what are your certifications? I don't know the classifications or the certs that are required to have your level of qualifications. Well, give us some understanding of what you have.
I'm probably one of the most least qualified people, to be honest. I didn't do EOD in the military. I was in the British Army for a year before I bust my knee and then came out in 2001. But I became involved in mine clearance training in the late 2000s in Myanmar, and started to learn and then work alongside some projects to clear some villages in Myanmar. And then after the last 6-month trip there in 2014, I then ended up coming out a month later to Ukraine to volunteer here. And it was more from my time on the ground, actually working alongside other combat engineers or EOD techs, Ukrainian ones and some foreign ones as well, that I just built my skill set up more. I then did humanitarian mine action qualifications in, I think it was 2016 or 2017. And since then I've just been building up in the background alongside the work that I do here. And then I do some consulting across the EU now as well to different parts of NATO.
Well, perfect. I want to touch on the consulting now, and we're going to review it before we end. But my goal with this is to get Chris's website, get his information down there. You just click on it and just say, hey, Chris, we'd love for you to train up our unit. He can do it over the internet. They're providing your military unit, with either in the States or Britain or just a unit that, obviously we want to share this knowledge with, and he can take a deeper dive. We're going to touch lightly on a couple of things that Chris wants to share, just some of the things he's pulled from the field or trainers that he has. But my point is we don't want our men and women not to be prepared. And if you're a forward-leading officer, and if you're a sergeant like myself, this is the type of guy you want to sit down and book an hour training with Chris, and donate to his calls, put some diesel in his car. He does all this for free to begin with, but he's going to help you. But it'd be nice, for us to tap into his knowledge and learn, so our guys don't have to bleed and learn these lessons themselves. Chris, how do you want to go into some of the items you brought, or what are you thinking?
Obviously you can see behind us, we do have a lot of training materials at our training place out of Kiev. This is a mix of stuff that we've either cleared off the frontline ourselves or we've been given access to by different units that we work with. We are fortunately in a position where we're able to find out about new and emerging threats coming out, not as fast as they happen, but very, very soon after they do happen, of which we're always fortunate to be able to get examples of most of the pieces that we're looking for. And I think there's some of the people who are going to watch this and they're not going to like what I'm going to say, but there we go. There is a big problem that I see happening across the European Union, across NATO, across the West as a whole. I've had a lot of EOD techs and combat engineers reach out from all manner of different places across the planet that are looking for information on new and emerging threats, because for whatever reason, the information here, it's wide open. You can find access to that information, but outside of Ukraine, not many people are actually being told about the severity of the situation here. We quite regularly get contacted asking if we can explain the kind of booby traps that are being found here, so that specific partners are able to either train their own troops or to be able to train Ukrainians as part of the Ukrainian training tasks that are happening in places like Poland and Germany and France and other places like this. And I don't really think there's a full understanding of what's going on here, because we are so far past the level of the old style of booby trapping that we used to see. We still see it, you will still see grenades under tank mines, grenades in washing machines, MS3s, ML8s being used to booby trap tank mines and stuff. But the problem is now we're starting to see a lot of more microprocessors. We're starting to deal with programmable systems. We're starting to deal with magnetic sensors, microwave sensors, light sensitive diodes, acoustic sensors, and these are being produced very, very cheaply. The parts are coming from open market commerce, and it's bad enough that we have these. It's no different really to the things that EOD techs and combat engineers would have been dealing with in places like Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria. But the issue out here is you're not just finding one or two examples of it. Some of these things are being produced in the tens of thousands. Some of them are being produced in the hundreds of thousands. And it's it's hard to kind of grasp how big this issue is now. And then when you mix that with the fact that 3D printing has become so readily available to people, social media is so readily available to people, you get this wash of information goes out where someone will create a device or they'll find a device, they put that information up on social media, another person sees it, they think, oh, that looks like a great idea, I'm going to make my own version. But maybe they just want to make it slightly different, or they don't have exactly the correct materials to make a carbon copy, so they'll produce their own variant of it. So on day one, week one, you might have one variant of this munition. By day 20, you could have 10 or 20 different variants of this one singular munition that all follow the same characteristics, but they all might function slightly different. The arming might be slightly different, the disarm procedures for it might be different. So it gets very, very complicated. Some of these I'm not going to go into detail about these. They are on mainstream media now. You know, people are aware that they're out. It's been a long time that we haven't really spoken about these devices because they haven't made mainstream media. But things like the PTM3 anti-tank mine, scat min, for quite some time now, the fusing has been getting replaced with a 3D printed housing. And this still works as a magnetic sensor, but the magnetic sensor, it's a much lower threshold. It has a self-destruct mechanism, but because it's a programmable sensor, you could have two that you think are the same, but unless you 100% know where they were manufactured and what program was actually programmed into them, you could be looking at two very different variants of this. There's a number of these sensors now being produced. And again, 3D printed, it's simple, it's easy, and the information is very easy for people to get shared around.
Isn't the cost on these three, I know how much these 3D prints, because how much we do with the fiber drone and the cylinders and munitions that I work with, but I mean, we're talking about some of these things that we're putting together like $15, $20
Yeah.
for these.
Yeah.
If that, at
Yeah,
times.
it's not expensive. Obviously there needs to be some R&D development going. Just to be able to make them work in the first place and test them. But once they know what they're doing and they're able to produce them, it's just a case of turning on that 3D printer. And I mean, we're seeing it with a lot of the drone munitions. You know, there is tens and tens, if not hundreds, of different types of drone munitions being 3D printed and produced. All the fusing is slightly different. They all have a slightly different explosive capacity. They all have a slightly different fragmentation capacity. You will have some that are only fused for specific types of Soviet fusing. You'll have some that allow fusing for both Western fusing and Russian fusing. And you know, if you look at a lot of these Ukrainian drone munition bomb shops, for want of a better term, you know, guys will be getting sent out to the front line to just go and pick up UXO. No EOD background, no combat engineer background, no real explosive training background, and they are being expected to go out into the front line, pick up unexploded ordnance, bring it back, someone will chop it up, get the explosive out of it, get the detonators out of it, and then they just produce a new drone munition out of it. It's bonkers.
Yeah.
It is absolutely bonkers, and it is incredibly dangerous. That's the most important part of it, you know. So. There's a fairly new one. It is out publicly now on social media. So again, most of this is just a 3D printed body, but I won't go too in depth into it. But the functioning is no different to a PFM1 butterfly mine. You're just using a different medium of explosive. But again, it's super simple, super cheap to make. And they're being produced in the thousands. You know, most people would look at that on the ground and not really think anything of it.
It looks like a vape almost.
Yeah,
you know?
pretty much. Although the vapes are being booby trapped as well anyway, so even if I saw a vape, I wouldn't be picking it up. You know, we tell all our students to understand that almost anything and everything can be booby trapped on the front line. And quite often they won't believe the level that goes to, so you literally have to show them and catch them out when we're doing the training. That's booby trapped, that's booby trapped. You know, anything, it doesn't matter. If you have a person that doesn't really understand the mechanics of fusing, especially mechanical fusing, you will find people making quite big, bulky devices. But once you fully understand the principles and what you can get away with and what you can't, you can booby trap a $5 note. It's easy, and you can make it look like it is just a $5 note. But it's what's underneath that, it's what's behind that. It's just, the problem here is you have influx now. So Syria, I'll use Syria as an example. Syria had a massive influx of fighters going there from Chechnya, from Afghanistan and from Iraq. Well, in Ukraine, we now have influence from Chechnya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Colombia, Brazil. There's foreign volunteers on both sides of the conflict here, on both sides of the war here, that have all dealt with different conflicts around the world. And what they're doing is they're bringing all that experience here. All the radio-controlled vehicle-borne IEDs that we were seeing in mid-22 to the start of 2023, in and around like Bakhmut and Soledar and places like this, and even for down in Mariupol, they were doing it as well. The influence of that has mostly come from the Chechen side and from the Syrian side. So it's a complete mess.
So this evolution that you're seeing over 10 years at this point for you being involved in Ukraine is just, it doesn't even resemble, for the most part, what you were facing 10 years ago on the EOD side?
No, back in 2014 and 2015, we were dealing with military manufactured booby trap systems like the MS-3, the ML7, the ML8, grenades behind door frames, grenades underneath boxes of ammunition, a lot of tripwires around, and then conventional munitions. I never even saw a drone dropped munition till 2017. That was the first time we ever saw one, and it was I believe it was a Mavic dropping single VOG 17 projected grenade rounds. That was the first sign of any drones that we ever saw. And a lot of people didn't think it would pick up. They didn't think it would kind of go on. It was seen as a gimmick. Now, drone munitions and landmines are on a par with each other because of the sheer amount of drone munitions that are being used. And it's not just about having a munition dropped on you or having a munition dropped by a drone, which is then laying wait for a vehicle or a tank or a specific target. What we've now seen is obviously with the hype of jamming coming in, different companies and different people producing their own anti-drone shotgun ammunition and things like this. We're seeing a lot of downed FPVs drones. We're seeing a lot of downed drone munition delivery drones, whether they be shot down or whether they be brought down by ECM, fiber optics. It can be the cable's been intercepted or snapped or whatever. So you now have a huge amount of drone UXO, which is even worse than having to deal with the landmines because, as I say, with the drone munitions, there's no major standardization of the arming systems. There's a huge amount of people even just getting blown up arming the drones in the first place to send the drones out. And it's sadly an argument that I've had to have a couple of times by major drone supporters. I don't like drones, but I'm not against them. They serve a purpose. They're a tool in a toolbox. But because the standardization of munitions isn't there either, there's a lot of people getting injured just setting the drone up. So, it's dangers everywhere.
Yeah, it's not. I can speak a lot to that. Let's see. I hate to give our numbers, but we flew 4 drones Saturday, and I had different successes with different drones. Right there, they're all fiber, and the fiber worked perfectly. But the detonators we had just one that just didn't do its thing, and you've got a drone sitting there, and this is public knowledge, but the voltage on the battery, once it gets below a certain point, is intended to send a charge, but the drone should have. We think it got shot down, which, if that guy shot this down, it's pretty impressive. It was about 20 meters in the air, but it didn't detonate, when we saw. So we have the reconnaissance drone overhead, we saw it drop, and it's just sitting in this field. We keep saying, all right, go check on it every hour. Let's see if this thing actually blows up. But it's been a little disappointing with with some of the detonators, the timers, the accelerometers when they're or not impacting.
Yeah.
So to speak to that, we see these drones get caught in the drone nets, which is awesome. But if it's working effectively, when the signal's cut or when the battery drops at a certain voltage, it's still going off.
Yeah.
So as you said, there's no set standard on that. On the drone munitions, and extremely dangerous. And a lot of guys are getting hurt on setting them up. Yeah.
I mean, we get a lot of requests from the individuals and the units that we train now to give them training on how to deal with downed FPVs, how to deal with FPVs that have crashed into the positions but it's just not exploded, or they've had a drone munition drop on them. Because it's not like, I'm just going to keep using Iraq and Afghanistan as an example. I never served in Iraq or Afghanistan, but I've got a lot of friends and one of my old bosses that served there, people that taught me, and they've all said the same thing, because if you're out on patrol in Afghanistan, you came across something that you thought was a threat or you knew was a threat, if you could, you would hunker down, you would call out EOD. EOD would fly in on a helicopter after they finished eating ice cream and come save the day and fly away into the sunset. Sorry, I think that was just the US ones, but but the reality is, you had someone, you could pick up that phone, pick up that radio, call someone. If you were lucky, someone was going to come out. Ukraine, there's no one to come out to. If they're lucky, there's maybe one combat engineer for every 1,000 soldiers on the front line. If you find a problem on the front line, you're either going to get told to find a way to deal with it or just bypass it and just leave it. But you're not always in a position to be able to do that. If an FPV drone with a thermobaric round lands in your trench and doesn't blow up, you can't just bail out of your trench and go somewhere else. You're not allowed. You'll be seen as deserting. You've got to do something about it. So a lot of the training that we do is teaching people on a very basic level how to deal with things in the safest way they can, so that they can continue with what their mission is, but still be safe.
Or we had that scenario when I sent you. Here's one thing that's very interesting is public knowledge, we have Starlinks, most team have Starlinks, so we're at our position outside of Kharkiv, and I sent you that video of those multiple buckets of that brown ooze. We think it's some AT&T, and of course we just, there's no tripwires, no detonators, just open it up, and there's just, in cylinders with fins, and it would be quite a drone that could lift that much weight, but it was there, and it was just bypass it, just tag the door, it's mined, be careful, don't mess around with it, and just bypass. Chris said something, and this is why I know this interview is so important, and I know that by sitting down for this, this time, that lives will be saved. Chris pointed out a couple of things to me. Last year when we were talking, you said there's conservatively 80 years of work here in Ukraine to demine this country. And I said, okay, what's your point of reference with this? And he said, look at World War II. They're still pulling ordnance out of the ground there. And then Chris told me a number yesterday, if I remember it correctly, you said for every day of war, there's typically about 1 month of cleanup left just from those extended approximately.
As a rough average. It's probably way more higher than that, to be honest. Especially if you were to look at places like Bakhmut or Avdiivka, where you had super heavy levels of fighting going on. You're talking months and months and months, if not years, to be able to clear around places like that, because the saturation of UXO, landmines, scout mines, submunitions, it's just so high. Whoever goes through that, you're not always going to be able to run demining machines through it. You're not going to be able to run animals and dogs through that because there's just such a saturation. It's going to have to be done by hand, and then you've got all the buildings that have been collapsed, you've got all the basements that are all caved in, you've got all the remains of human beings to sift through. It's just going to take years and years. And I would say that 80 years is conservative. Ukraine's never going to be mine free. It's never going to be mine free. You know, if you look at Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, they're still clearing mines. World War II, France, Germany, still clearing stuff. Still pulling stuff out of building sites in the UK. You know, it's never going to end.
Chris, in our area where I'm working with the fiber drone, we got to know some of the locals are very supportive there, and there was a farmer, and he had 80% of his fields are mine, so it was previously Russian territory, and there's no one to help him. He's just trying to figure it out, identify them, and remove what he can, just learning himself. And that's the story throughout Ukraine. Chris, you mentioned the fiber drone. What's your thoughts? That was my big push. That's my contribution. Just to give you an idea, this is literally a spool of fiber right here, 15 kilometers, and we attach it to the drone. It spools out the back end. A little holder comes out here, and the fiber comes out the rear. How's this going to change the battlefield? Any thoughts on this one? It is. I mean, it is new.
I'm not saying that I'm going to like it, or you're going to like the answer, because of the sheer levels of drones being used on the front line now, whether they be FPVs, whether they just be surveillance ISR drones, because the levels of jamming are getting better as well on both sides. You're starting to see a much bigger push from both sides to use only fiber. This creates a few nightmare scenarios for us because it now limits the amount of time that we can go and spend anywhere near the front line to support clearance operations for clearing landmines. It means that we have to really think about how close we will even put our ambulance to the front line to pick up casualties now. Because if you've got a 1 kilometer wide strip of no man's land and fiber optic drones that are doing 5 to 10 kilometers, then everyone is at risk, not just on the front line. And we're seeing that happen now. We're seeing supply routes on both sides being targeted by FPVs with fiber optic cables, because they're able to fly across that battle space, get behind lines and target either casualties being taken off the front line or supplies and resupply personnel come in. Another thing we've spoken about as well is, if you imagine that no man's land where you have hundreds of FPVs with fiber optic that have been flying backwards and forwards across them, and then you also have ATGMs, which are obviously wire guided, flying across them as well, you end up in a situation where you end up with tens, then hundreds, then thousands of these lengths of fiber optic cable and command and guide wire across the front line. If I was out doing clearance for a reconnaissance unit, or I was out doing resupply route through part of no man's land, the second I'm going to hit one of those lines, so I have to assume there's a tripwire. I then have to follow the SOPs as if it was a tripwire. And at some point, I'm going to have to tell myself, no, you followed this now for 60 meters. It's not a tripwire. Yeah. It's got to, and it will waste a lot of time and resources having to deal with that. So I think it is very, obviously from a military objective, yes, having fiber optic command wire drones makes perfect sense. There's no jamming it unless someone can actually physically interfere with that cable. Then it's perfect because you're not worrying about having to deal with jamming or anything like this. I will always resort back to looking at where it's going to cause us problems for either the work or the training.
Of course.
So,
and it's not detectable. So there's a lot of times you'll see the guys who wear they're called sugar cubes, but you detect to see what drone activities in the sky. And since there's no RF signal, we're all you're going to hear is the impact when we're coming in for you, right there. So I thought I would try to make a contribution as well. So hey, you got one more there to mention.
I'll keep it short and sweet. If you're an EOD technician and you don't know what this is, or you're a combat engineer and you don't know what this is, This is a drone-dropped 3D printed variant of a POMS-2 anti-personnel scat line. If you'd like any more information, by all means, reach out. There's some information we won't give on an open video, but yeah, the modern battlefield is just awash with emerging threats at this point. There's a lot of mad scientists producing a lot of 3D printed stuff.
Very effective. Chris, you see that? I hadn't seen this particular variation, but it's real clear what the fragmentation pattern is on this, and the elevated portion here allows it not to be buried in the ground, but it is effective, and it's got something on the back end that I'm just now seeing. So the innovation of the Ukrainians on munitions is mind-blowing, because there's no restrictions, and the necessity of them getting this right and making refinements. I've seen teams that take their munitions, and on the back end they've done some designs to ensure that there's a fragmentation not only out with the primary, but the back also serves a purpose as well. And they practice and study these things, and they're getting better and better. They're leading the world right now in this technology. Chris, there's some good news. I mean, you're here. That's one thing that people don't understand, and this is something you and I have seen from the beginning of the war. Literally, the best people in the world have shown up to Ukraine to support Ukraine in the defense of this country. You got men and women like Chris who have just done so much, and no, just recognition. They're lucky sometimes to get their diesel reimbursed when they go out and work for weeks or go pull munitions out of certain AOs. And I just feel very strongly, guys, that if you want to get in touch with Chris, his organization should be linked to the bottom. Make a time. If you're forward leaning and you're a proper, officer, or you're, sergeant, or any, if you wear the uniform, get in touch with Chris. Teach your men what's going on in the EOD world here by a guy who does it every day. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm making these videos. What are your final thoughts, Chris, on this?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's fine.
I don't know.
We just
I don't know
live in
anymore.
that, bro.
You're right. There is a lot of really good people that have come out. Ukraine was not really thought of much prior to 2022. There was still a number of good people came out here since 2014. But since 2022, there's been a lot of really good people that have come out to support Ukraine in so many different ways, whether it be bomb disposal, whether it be medical, whether it just be handing out babies' diapers to just families in affected areas across the east and the south of the country. I'm really fortunate. I've got some friends that I see from time to time when I see you. When you're not busy doing fiber optic drone stuff, I've got a really good team of volunteers that I work with, and a number of good people that support us in the background. So, but yeah, ultimately, I think the point of this video as a whole is for those of you that are in uniform, especially from a engineer background or an EOD background. Apparently, the war might end tomorrow. We're told.
Yeah, we're told.
So we'll see what happens. But I think it's important to note that as and when the war does end, we're going to see a lot of Western partners sending their engineers out and their techs out here to support clearance. I would strongly advise, and you don't have to take it from me. You can go and get your information from anywhere else if you can find that information. I would clue yourself up now before you come out, because it's what is seen on TV and what the actual ground threat is like here. It's two very different worlds.
Yeah. Well, I've seen you do enough trainings that when these guys want to come out, if they could integrate in with you, work with you, contract with you, it would save lives, and they'd be so much more effective. Because this is the battlefield truth is right here in this with Chris, and he's got an effective team. And anyways, guys, that's the purpose of this video. Just want to say thanks for watching all the way through. Please push this out to other people who EOD members. Please get Chris's website below. Sponsor him, support his efforts. Right here, it's a righteous cause, and that's it, man.
If you come to Ukraine, hit us up. We do barbecue once a week in the summertime. It'll be good.
Spot on. Hey, Semper Fi.